It's 12:02. Welcome to the March 2022 San Francisco Bay Area ITE meeting. Today we're going to hear from Chris DiPrima about some San Francisco airport updates, how they've been doing on their plan that they adopted a few years ago. Before we get into that, just to introduce myself, if this is your first meeting for the year, my name is Lauren Devini and I'm the Bay Area Section President. And then we also have Charmin Sola, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm the ITE SF Bay Area Section Treasurer. Hello.
And our other officers were not able to make it today, but thank you to all who are coming here in attendance. We had a very active meeting last month, and this is just a listening meeting, so I hope you enjoy. Just one announcement for before we get into the presentation is that the district annual meeting is at the end of June in Palm Springs. So please sign up if you haven't already. I think there's some cost savings if you sign up sooner rather than later, as well as cost savings for anyone working for a public agency. And there's also student rate. So if you need any more information, I don't have a website off the top of my head, but you're welcome to email me. I'll put my email in the chat and I can get you connected to that information. With that, to get into our airport themed meeting, I put together a poll to make sure everyone's paying attention. These are very just fun questions. So let's get into that before we let Chris speak. There we go. So, okay. This is my first time making a poll, but you have two questions. So what is your favorite Bay Area airport? Please note our speakers from SFO, so I guess maybe you better pick that one. But there's Oakland, San Francisco Airport, and San Jose. We have some few other smaller airports if you want to vote for that. And then just curious if you all like to arrive to the airport nice and early, or if you are like me and you like to run to your gate and waste no time waiting at the airport. We'll give folks a few more seconds, maybe let it go for about a minute. Thanks for humoring me as I give you this poll. Pretty good participation. So I'll end the poll. You all can see the results. I think you can. Yeah. Are you seeing the results? Cool. So looks like SFO is our top airport, and a lot of you are very punctual people. I like to see it. Thanks again for doing that little poll. So getting into our main content, I'll let Chris DiPrima take it away about planning efforts at the San Francisco International Airport.
But before we start that, sorry, if you feel comfortable, please turn on your camera and we're going to take a quick picture before the presentation begins.
Look at all those smiling faces. We love to see it. Okay. Feel like we got some picture. Cool. 1, 2, 3. Oh man. Okay. Thanks all. All right, Chris, the floor is yours. You should be able to share your presentation.
All right, great. Thanks. I will, I'm on one monitor today, so I'll do my best here and let's see how I do. All right, hopefully you see a slide that says SFO Airport Development Plan.
Yes, I see it.
All right. I have to hold myself up on the camera here, so I'm just going to turn myself off. But thanks for inviting me to speak today about the SFO Airport Development Plan and a lot of the planning process that goes into it. My name is Chris DiPrima. I've been an airport planner here at SFO for the past 7 years. Before that, I spent 3 or 4 years on the other coast at the Philadelphia International Airport. And the ADP, the Airport Development Plan, was really the first large project that I worked on as we got to SFO, as I got to SFO. So always excited to take folks through it.
Yeah, it was after. You keep up over there, you know.
If you're not muted, please make sure to mute yourself. Thank you.
So just a few fast facts about SFO. We are the busiest airport in the Bay Area with about 70% of the market share. In 2019, we were the 7th busiest in the United States, serving over 130 destinations on 62 airlines. It may not surprise you that we currently have fewer destinations, but actually we almost have as many airlines as we had at the height of our most recent growth spurt. So also in 2019, we were the 24th busiest airport in the world, serving almost 58 million passengers. Those figures, by the way, in the bottom, are for 2018. They are also reversed. That should say 76% domestic, 24% international. So in 2019, we had a total of 92 gates at SFO. Yet we had a 38% increase in passenger traffic over the decade on only a 15% increase in aircraft operations. Really speaking to the constraints of our runway system, where there are a limited number of operations an hour, and the strong growth in passenger demand. I also like to show the 158,000 passengers per day, which I think on any given day puts us a little bit above Daly City in terms of population as a place. So looking back in time, the airport was constructed or opened as Mills Field back in the 20s. And the line that you're seeing is the growth of the airport as we went from one map, which is million annual passengers, up to the 2000s. And along the way, we had several really spectacular master plans that did define the direction of the airport. I think we all know how rare it is to find any organization that actually executes on its master plan. And when I look back at these previous plans, actually a fair amount of these projects actually went forward. Here, for example, is our 1989 master plan. So that was the one prior to the ADP. And on this, if you think back to what the airport looked like in 1989, we had since then the addition of the international terminal, the new rental car center, the air train, the BART extension, the hotel, long-term parking garages, renewals of cargo buildings, all of these things which were actually laid out in '89 and have been executed over the past 30 years. But that also means that we've sort of reached the end of this planning cycle. So the '89 master plan was really designed to bring us from where we were to about 57 million annual passengers. And the last projects that were executed under that project are things like the new Terminal 1 and boarding area B. So obviously hitting 58 million passengers almost in 2019, we were cresting and we were really operating beyond at least the design quality of service that we would expect. And yet the people kept coming. So back in 2015, 2014, actually, when we saw this coming down the pike, we commissioned an airport development plan. And the idea behind it is to provide the highest level of international and domestic guest service and be the #1 long haul and international gateway. And that's the big arrow that drives all of our decision making. We need to maximize the limited airfield capacity, the use of the limited airfield capacity that we have, because we cannot expand or relocate our runways due to environmental concerns. So that also means that we have to bring the terminal area and the ground transportation system into alignment with the number of aircraft and the number of people that our existing airfield can bring us. And I think that this is an interesting sort of context compared to a lot of other transportation systems where you think, oh, if I add this or if I add that, I'm increasing capacity. Really, our capacity is set by the runway system. And as we've seen, and as many of you have probably observed, just because we don't have a gate for you does not mean that your airplane does not arrive. So it's a unique circumstance where really the runways are what are defining the capacity, and everything else is about how we manage that and how we avoid, for example, having you wait out on the tarmac for an hour waiting for a gate. So just to give you an overview, again, the idea is to build and improve the existing terminals, parking, and support facilities to come into alignment with the runway system. And all of these projects are funded by airport revenue bonds. We are an enterprise division of the City and County of San Francisco. So while we pay money into the Downtown General Fund, no money from the general fund ever comes back into the airport. It is all user fee supported. So I mentioned the maximum practical airfield capacity. So this is again set by the geometry of the runways and the fact that our landing runways are only 750 feet apart. So the light green line, passengers, continues to grow over time econometrically. It's really just based on the size of the employment center of the Bay Area. But operations, number of aircraft, eventually hit a limit. And that limit is really defined at around 1,475 to 1,500 daily operations, which are landings and takeoffs. After that point, similar to what we've seen from 2011 to 2019, all the growth really has to happen through fuller aircraft and larger aircraft. So with that as background, our ADP planning priorities were really built around these constraints in our limited campus footprint. We have the terminal area in the center of the airport where really only the essentials can go. Passenger terminals, vital ground transportation, and offices directly related to operations. Moving north, but still on this side of the runways, we have the land uses that support the passenger terminal in what we call the West Field. Those are things like additional ground transportation, short-term aircraft parking, cargo that goes onto the bellies of passenger aircraft, and even things like essentially anything that is necessary to support the terminal area. And then on the other side of the runways, because they're much harder to get to from the perspective of an aircraft, or even from a worker, are the land uses which really don't need that kind of adjacency. Things like aircraft remain overnight parking, fuel storage, ground support equipment maintenance, airline maintenance. This is where you see the United and American maintenance centers. We also had as background a series of ongoing projects, and I mentioned a few of them, but these are the projects that are really designed to finish out the 1989 master plan. The most notable one that's still ongoing is the new Terminal 1 and Boarding Area B. Other recent achievements in that respect include the AirTrain extension out to our long-term parking campus, the long-term parking garage number 2 that we have up there now, as well as the airport hotel, also AirTrain accessible. We also had a series of taxiway improvements that are proposed as ongoing projects because they're not really designed to do anything except improve our compliance with FAA standards. Then we have the recommended ADP projects. So these are the projects that form the basis of CEQA EIR and are looking to take us from where we are today, 57 million passengers, up to that ultimate capacity, which is around 71 million passengers, and doing so at the quality of experience that we expect of ourselves. So I'll take you through some of these individually. First, zooming in on the terminal area. So as mentioned, the T1 Terminal 1 redevelopment is ongoing. The Courtyard 3 connector, which connects United in Terminal 3 to boarding area D, which is in Terminal 2. That actually just opened up, even though we're still working on it. We also have a renovation of our Terminal 3 West to provide new international gates, and then some improvements to the international terminal. But looking farther ahead, we have some ADP projects in the terminal area, the most notable of which is boarding area H. So first of all, just a little bit more detail on some of the bigger projects there. Harvey Milk Terminal 1, redevelopment started in earnest in 2017. We have gotten most of the way there. Currently, there is a big hole in the ground where Terminal 1 North, where the Delta ticket counters used to be. And we're expecting full completion of that project, including the check-in hall and the connections to the C gates or boarding area C in late 2024. That is a little bit delayed from pre-pandemic, but it is still ongoing, and we're quite excited about it because we're going to need every piece of check-in counter and every gate that we can get. On the other side of the airport, we have Terminal 3 West. That is a modernization project to take one of the oldest parts of our terminal complex, give it a seismic retrofit, and change the existing gates there to international gates, what we call swing gates, because they can be used for either one. It also modernizes the concessions and really brings that side of the terminal up to the standard that we set on the east side, if you've been there. But the ADP project, the big ADP project in the terminal area, is a proposed boarding area H. This would net us 5 because it closes one, so it's a 6 wide body or 10 narrow body aircraft swing gate complex that would be connected directly to boarding area G, where the existing United and Star Alliance flights are. So that's again trying to bring our terminal capacity in terms of the number of gates in line with the number of aircraft that can be delivered to us per hour. Otherwise, we have to resort to things like busing. So the terminals are sort of the sexy part, but this is equally, if not more important in some ways, to make sure that the airport operates the way that it needs to. We have a lot of very old cargo and support buildings in our West Field. A lot of these were built in the 50s, just as sort of boxes, and they've reached the end of their useful life. In addition, we need to move some of them to get out of the way of other future developments, but really they are in need of some renewal on their own. So in the future, you'll see some new cargo buildings sprouting up along 101 and McDonald Road underneath the air train, including 2 new cargo facilities, including some double-decker cargo facilities, which are, while rare in the United States, common abroad in airports that don't have a lot of real estate. Also a building to serve ground support equipment maintenance. We have an office complex. So my office is actually in the building called 674 back here. You can see it on the air train if you're coming in from the rental car center. And we have the rest of the campus to unify the rest of the airport commission staff that's also going to go into that area, because it is a function that does not need to be inside the terminals, but does need to be close. Ian, I see the question about the boarding area H project. So funny story about cargo. Cargo has never recovered to the levels that it was in the year 2000. So what happened after that is Oakland really got built up as the cargo hub for the Bay Area, mostly for freighter cargo. And so actually what we do most of here by volume is belly cargo, and it's really the high value stuff that needs to arrive to the peninsula. So even though I I think we are expanding the amount of cargo that we have compared to today, but we are still far below what that 1989 master plan thought that we needed. And that's sort of the flexibility to build buildings that can have many lives over time. Just to give you an example, the construction team for our Terminal 1 is actually in an office called the Big Room that sits inside of an abandoned aircraft hangar. So making sure that we have adaptive reuse. Moving on to ground access projects. So I mentioned the AirTrain extension and the hotel AirTrain, but we've also, if you've ever been on the AirTrain at peak hours, first of all, get on the last train car, just word to the wise, it's always emptier. But also we need to upgrade it and expand it to a fourth car on our blue line, which is the one that goes up to the rental car center. We also have the airport as part of the '89 master plan, did one of the first consolidated rental car centers in the country where everybody was under one roof. That means that it is now the oldest consolidated rental car center in the US. And even with the advent of ride apps like Uber and Lyft, the overall growth, not only in the volume of rental cars, but also just the quality of service that's expected out of these Conracs has increased. And so one of the projects in the ADP is a new Conrac on the site of our long-term parking facility. Another ground access project that's sort of going to be a big change is to replace our aging central parking garage with a new facility that we call the Central Hub. That not only serves short-term parking demand, but it is also designed to be a transit hub and also to provide supplemental linear curbside on the ground level, which is where our tunnels let out. It would also allow us to connect back to our international terminal in a connection that is right now very difficult to make. This would also be the time to reconstruct our upper and lower level roadways because again, those were built back in the 50s and 60s for the most part. And while they're, I understand, very impressive from an engineering perspective and what they were able to do with very thin concrete, it's definitely time for an upgrade. One of our major sort of campus-wide infrastructure projects to go into some more support facilities is our shoreline protection program. So this is meant to address storm surge plus sea level rise. And it's going to be consisting of a new seawall system, including a little bit of fill of the San Francisco Bay north of the 19s. Unfortunately, that just can't be avoided due to the geometry involved. And it would also include some new protection along 101 as well. This also is part of an effort that allows us to improve our airfield design standards. Obviously, SFO is an airport that was built a very, very long time ago, was not really designed to accommodate aircraft like the A380. And so we exist today in a series of what are called modifications of standards. So those are meant to be temporary, and we're going to be making sure that we can meet those safety standards in the future. Moving on to some other support facilities. I mentioned the Westfield cargo renewal, but we have a lot of other needs for example, remain overnight parking. United Airlines, for example, has just bought 500 new aircraft and need places to put them. And especially as we get busier, the need for this remain overnight parking also tends to increase because of the way that the airlines have to schedule to fit in at the right times, both here and in Paris or Tokyo or wherever they're going. We also have some renewal of our airport maintenance facilities, the option to build a new flight kitchen, although most flight kitchens are actually off airport and they truck on. And also upgrades to our Super Bay hangar, which is the one behind those 3 big tanks that say SFO out on our east field. So putting all of this together, it really starts to look like a brand new airport in terms of the number of places that we're touching between our ongoing and our ADP projects. But such is the nature of airports, that they are ever evolving. So just wanted to speak a little bit about what we're doing on sustainability, because it doesn't really have a slide that I can show you in terms of a building that we're building, except for a future all-electric central utility plant, which is part of our capital project queue. But we're also always working to improve the connections between our mass transit systems, both public and private, things like the Marin Airporter. Our air train is now on Google Maps. So if you're doing transit directions, you can get directions door to door. We extended the air train to the long-term parking campus, which eliminates an absurd number of buses from the roads each year. As I mentioned, not only are we electrifying our central utility plant, but we are becoming ready for 100% electrification of ground support equipment, as well as electrification of the ride app fleet under the state clean miles standard, and to private vehicles, personal vehicles as well. And we've also been leading the way on the adoption of sustainable aviation fuel. And that is a topic unto itself that is fascinating. And we're proud to have been able to push that acceptance forward to the point where a lot of the airlines and airline alliances are making commitments on SAF purchases. So I mentioned this is a 2016 airport development plan. So we actually kicked off the study back in 2014. We went to draft final in September of 2016. Since then, we've been working on a lot of feasibility planning so that we're ready to go, because really the big effort that's ongoing right now is just the environmental processing approval under CEQA, which is in progress, and we expect it to continue through 2022 into early 2023. With that, I see that there are already, let's see, there's already one or two more questions. Oh, Lauren, thanks. Yes, the Harvey Milk Terminal 1 really is spectacular. Yeah, if you haven't been to the art gallery, that is a highlight. You don't even feel like you're at an airport. And I like airports, so it means something to say that. To answer, Ian, your second question about the Terminal 2, Terminal 3 connector, yes, so the connectors for passengers are open. So there are now secure and landside connections between Terminals 2 and 3. There will not be a public plane watching deck. We have one of those in Terminal 2 proper, so just next door, what's called the Sky Terrace. And in terms of tenants, those are going to be those operations offices that do have to be in the terminal. So what's right now in the 5th floor of our international terminal, those offices will move over there. That frees up some space in the international terminal for lounges and airline ticket offices and other things. So the question on travel demand management. So let's see, does SFO encourage their employees to use alternative modes of transportation? Absolutely. So one interesting dynamic for SFO is that the Airport Commission, people like me, we're about 1,200 people of the 45,000 who work here. Every employer at the airport that has more than 25 people needs to have a transportation demand management strategy in place that includes things like parking cash outs. We also have a BART discount program that removes the surcharge that BART places onto airport trips. That used to only be available to commission workers, but now that has expanded to third-party tenants. And then in terms of repurposing the amount of parking dedicated on site, so this is very interesting because Boston, well, first I'll say our mass transit system is really not designed very well to serve airport times. We have a lot of 3-shift workers who obviously can't use BART. We have a lot of early morning and late night flights for which BART or SamTrans are also unavailable. So it puts us in an awkward position. Additionally, while there are a significant number of passengers, for example, who are very frequent flyers, about a third of our flyers only come here once a year. And they're flying so infrequently that it's very hard to change their behavior. And there was a great study done at Boston Logan, which had a parking cap on it, which showed that generally when people aren't able to park, they go to use a mode that involves a deadhead trip, like being picked up or dropped off, using a taxi or a ride-hailing app. Additionally, parking at the airport is incredibly expensive. $45 a day, I think, is what we're up to in the short-term parking area. So it's not like we're undervaluing parking, and that all goes into a cost center that offsets some of the costs of the mass transit providers. We also finally just we had one of the first in the country clean vehicle standards, which gave a significant discount to mass transit operators who switched to clean fuels. So Tony asks, how is SFO providing for a future with high-speed rail? We think that high-speed rail is a great idea. The SFO to LAX corridor, or really San Francisco Bay Area to the LA Basin, is one of the most served air markets in the world. And we would love to be able to take all of those flights and put those people on rail and repurpose that capacity for longer haul operations that can't be served by a rail. So we have submitted many letters of support, and we've also been working with the California High-Speed Rail Authority on a seamless connection at Millbrae Station. Of course, by numbers, we're equally excited about Caltrain electrification, because that's going to be bringing many more people into Millbrae Station than high-speed rail probably ever will. But yes, we're hoping, we have our fingers crossed that those small LAX, Burbank, all those Southern California flights can be replaced by rail. So are there any needs to analyze the passenger movements within the airport to identify safety and congestion issues using simulation modeling and video analytics? So a couple of stages to that question. We don't do a lot of micro simulation modeling. We've actually done it a few times for our Terminal 1 project, just to understand passenger flows. But in general, we're lucky to have very generous corridor circulation compared to most other airports in the country. And so some of the more traditional spreadsheet modeling based tools tend to work fairly well for us. Video analytics, though, either video or LiDAR or some other technology, we think that can really pay dividends in terms of better understanding how our passengers, how our guests move through the terminal complex, where they dwell, where they get lost. So while we don't have any of that right now, and we are shying away from video analytics because of biometric tracking concerns, we are very excited about the idea of using a technology like a LiDAR to be able to better understand how people are moving through the facility, how long they're queuing, where they're getting caught up. Let's see, curious if the AIR is assuming electrification of Caltrain, excuse me. I do not have direct information, but I believe that because Caltrain electrification is ongoing, that is considered one of the projects in the background. So that's considered part of the, I don't have my CEQA terms right, but it's sort of part of the assumed background.
Great questions, everyone. We'll give folks maybe another minute or two to put in a question. And in the meantime, I have a question, maybe a little less technical, I guess, but just so curious. Chris, what are one of your favorite things about working at SFO, and what is the most, one of the more challenging things about working at SFO?
Sure. So, I mean, the amazing thing about an airport or really any transportation node is that, you see people who are having the best day of their life, people who are having the worst, people are going to a wedding, people are going to a funeral. You get to see people from literally all over the world. You watch people coming out of customs, and there are people there who are immigrating to the United States, and that is their first day in this country, their new country. So I think the best part for me is I take that responsibility very seriously, and I take great pride in the fact that SFO prides itself on providing that high level of guest service, so that when you get off the plane or when you get out of the car or BART and into the airport, that you feel like you're being taken care of. In terms of the most challenging, I think that it's a good question. I think that sometimes, obviously with any big system, you hope that it moves faster sometimes, but then again, as I mentioned, I worked at the Philadelphia International Airport. They had a capacity improvement project that they were studying in 2007, and it still hasn't moved. So I'm very thankful to SFO and really to the Bay Area that believes in the mission, and so I think that things at SFO actually move pretty quickly.
We get things done in the Bay Area.
That we do. So Maurice, our FAA Next Gen efforts considered as part of your landside terminal expansion. So FAA Next Gen really refers to a pretty large suite of individual efforts. In terms of planning, we have just turned on our ground-based augmentation system, which is a GPS-based approach path system that may allow us to make some improvements to approach and departure paths, mainly approach paths. So a lot of that stuff could affect, say, how tall buildings could be or where we have to keep areas clear. Really, the biggest thing that we took into account in terms of Next Gen was improvements to wake vortex separations. So for those who don't know, aircraft have to be separated a certain distance based on the wake turbulence that they give off. And because we have such a unique runway system, those separations really affect us if they get above a certain point. So in this, you see that when we get into this constrained environment, this blue line doesn't stop entirely, it just gets very shallow. So between the 2023, the base and the high demand levels, we do assume a certain degree of next gen improvements in terms of wake recategorization and time-based flow metering, which is just when the winds are howling, you can put the planes closer together because the wakes dissipate faster. Is it feasible to build another runway, say to the right of 28 right or left of 19 left? So it would be quite expensive. There are airports in the world that are built entirely on landfill, like Hong Kong, Kansai Airport in Japan. However, the policy of the City and County of San Francisco is that we will not study any runway work that would affect the San Francisco Bay unless it is recommended to us by a regional airport system planning entity. So it's feasible, but it is not something that we are currently studying because of that limitation. Now, when I talk about the constrained demand environment, at a certain point, SFO fills up. At about that same time, Oakland and San Jose fill up. So we'll be in a situation more like the London area where we have a lot of airports, but we no longer have any excess capacity. So when that happens, we think that a regional airport system plan will be necessary. But who knows? Noticed lately that flight availability at SFO is better than at SJC. Has there been a noticeable spike in passenger traffic? Since the end of the Omicron surge, yes, we have seen substantial increases in passenger traffic. Whereas in early February, we were at about a 50% of 2019 passenger levels. Now we're at 75%. And what that sort of hides is that the peak hours are essentially as busy as they've ever been. It's just that there are fewer peak hours, and the off-peak hours are quieter. So whereas in previous years, you might come to SFO at 1 in the afternoon between United's departure banks, and it's still pretty busy. Today, it might feel like a ghost town, but you come in an hour later and you'd think that you were right back in 2019. So that actually creates a huge challenge to manage, because staffing doesn't like to peak up and down like that. It's hard to keep concessions open if they're only really going to be busy for a few hours a day. So yes, even though the passengers are coming back in greater numbers, there are definitely some challenges that we need to go through. And unfortunately, that also means that despite being at a much lower overall demand level, we still occasionally have aircraft that need to sit out and wait for a gate. So just sort of crazy how that happens.
Looks like everyone had a chance to ask their questions. I don't need to take up your whole lunch hour. Chris, thank you so much for presenting today. It sounds like people are really interested, and you had a lot of great information, and we really, really appreciate your time. Chris's email's up there. If you want to jot that down, if you have any other questions for him. But I think with that, we'll wrap it up. And then one final announcement for the San Francisco Bay Area section is we'll probably have a student presentation in April, and that's always really exciting. I'm always so impressed by what the students are working on these days. So just stay tuned for an announcement about our April presentation. It'll probably be a longer lunchtime presentation, but a Wednesday or Thursday later in April. With that, thank you everyone so much, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.